Well, good morning. Welcome to the garden. I guess you accepted my challenge, huh? Those of you who were here Monday night for that whale of a party know what I'm talking about. I just asked where all those folks were on Sunday morning, and here you are. So, wasn't that a great party? Oh my gosh. I laughed, I cried. That's what I'm going to do all month, so get used to it. But it was just great, and I thank you all for being here and for being a part of that, and all those who spent so many hours and days and weeks and months planning this, because it was just a beautiful, beautiful evening, and I'm so grateful to all of you. What a time. And you know, they really did surprise me. I knew something was up, but I didn't know what. But I got my first hint of what the evening was going to be like when Mike told me that I just had to be ready to go by 6:15. And when I came downstairs ready, he said, oh, you know, our friends had already left. And I said, well, how are we going? He said, we're going to be picked up. The Forum bus came to pick us up. Were you aware of that? And I thought we were going to the Forum. And I was going to be admitted. It didn't happen, but I wondered. But anyway, it was just, that's how it started, and I knew what kind of an evening it was going to be, and it turned out to be that. So I'm so grateful, and so thank you. Thank you so very, very much. It was very meaningful. But today, I'm dealing with a topic that I have successfully avoided for the 20 years here at the Garden, and my years at St. Luke's before that, the topic of heaven and hell. But I decided, since so many people think about it and talk about it, that maybe we should deal with it in one way or another. And you remember that list of churchy words that we put together several weeks ago, probably a month or more ago? So many of those words could fall into the category of dealing with what happens after we die. There were words like predestination, saved, judgment, Jesus is the only way, salvation, eschatology, and heaven and the afterlife, and many, many more. And I'm going to touch on some of those, but not all of them in the time this morning. But you still have a glossary of terms in your programs. There was one in last week's and the week before. If you've missed those, we can probably put together a composite list. But there's a glossary of terms where I've tried to at least identify to the best of my ability what those things mean that you can have there. It's in the insert, I think. And then there's a section that's called leftovers, because there were some words that didn't fit neatly into any of the topics we were dealing with when we talked about churchy words and God's will and our free will, when we talked about the fossilization of Christianity, and then today when we're dealing with heaven and hell. So the words that didn't fit in those are considered to be leftovers. So you have them all there, and I hope they're useful in one way or another. But what do we say when we talk about heaven and hell? Where do we begin? I guess the first thing I have to say is, I don't know, nor does anyone else. None of us has come back to report what that's like after we die, at least to the best of my knowledge. Now, one of the things that does really intrigue me are those stories of NDEs, near-death experiences, that some people have, where they are understood as nearly dead and then come back, and they tell these remarkable stories that I keep wondering, is that a hint of what it's like after we die? Is that a hint of what heaven's like? But all I can say is that I don't know, and I can't know, and I don't think any of us can know with 100% accuracy. And yet there are folks who think they do because they quote the Bible and say, it says this in the Bible. I want to remind us what the Bible is. It is not God's handwritten dictation. That's not what it is. It is a story written by human beings. It's a story of folks like us, only in their period of time, who were trying to understand what life is all about, who God is, what God is like, and trying to solve or at least get some glimpse into what this afterlife is like. What is it all about? And so they begin writing all kinds of things. And one of the most well-known is the book of Revelation, which is the last book in the Bible. You need to know that that book is what's called apocalyptic writing. And apocalyptic stands for some really exaggerated type of writing that is vivid and graphic in terms of its images. And there are images both of heaven and of hell, And I really haven't spent a lot of time dwelling on Revelation because I really focus more on life here and now anyway, and I don't care for some of those images. But some of our more conservative friends really do that. And they believe that they can say, because of what they believe the Bible is saying, that they can decide who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. I don't know if you're aware of the name Rob Bell. He was a pastor, and he has written a book entitled Love Wins. And he begins the book talking about that very thing. He says this: whenever people claim that one group is saved, accepted by God, forgiven, enlightened, redeemed, and everybody else isn't, why is it that those who make this claim are almost always part of the group that's in? Have you ever thought about that? Well, I think we have to consider that whole thing. Now, I've mentioned before that I have a friend who talks to me quite a bit about some of her friends who keep telling her she's going to hell. And they tell her she's going to hell because she doesn't practice her faith the way they think she should and the way they do, and she doesn't believe what they think she should believe. And they tell her she's going to hell, and I always try to console her a little bit, and one of the things I say is, they don't get to decide. When it comes to the end of this life, it's in God's hands and no one else's. What I don't say to her, but what I sometimes think, is that I wonder about the state of their faithfulness and their connection with God, because those comments they make seem pretty judgmental to me. They seem that they're condemning her and saying they know what her eternal fate is going to be, and they can't. They don't have any way to know the state of their heart. I think it says more about where they are and the kind of people they are. It's self-righteous and it's arrogant. And I never say that to her, but sometimes I wish I did. Well, so where are we on this whole heaven and hell thing? Again, I think none of us can really know exactly what it's all about. But let me just kind of give you as briefly as I can what I would say. If we talk about hell, I see that as our being separated from God, usually by our own choice, because of self-centeredness, because of self-absorption, self-interest, totally absorbed in that. It often shows itself in a life that's not very loving, in a life that may be indifferent to the tragedies of the world and the things that are going on in the world, maybe anger, all kinds of negative effects that are spread all around them, kind of spewed around them. And I think whatever we are in this life can carry with us into that next life, whatever it is. So that's what I think about hell. When I think about heaven, I think it is being in harmony with God and with God's will for us. It's being in sync with God, in tune with God, if you will. There's a phrase that's often used for that. It's the word atonement, which literally means at-one-ment, to be at one with God. It means that we're closely connected to God in a very powerful, meaningful way. When we talk about this, sometimes you'll hear people say, well, they're living hell on earth, and this is where hell is. And I understand that sometimes it can really feel that way for people. There are those among us who are oppressed, who live a life of poverty, who are struggling with life, who suffer a great deal, and who can't see any light. They believe that they're living a hell already. And yet, I think what Jesus has assured us of is very true, that there is hope. It is not going to be that way always. There is more that can come to us. Life can be redeemed. Healing can happen. We can be restored in terms of our relationship. It really is a matter of what's called being saved. To me, that's what salvation is all about. To be saved means that every obstacle between us and God is wiped away. The way is clear. The door is open. The threshold is lowered. The walls have fallen down. And there's nothing between us and God. We can be connected with God in a powerful, powerful way. So where are we when we come to this whole thing about heaven and hell? Will we make it? Will we all be together in heaven? I guess I like to say that yes, we will, eventually. And part of the reason I say that is because we have free will. And we have free will in this life to turn toward God or turn away. I think the same thing may well be true in the next life. And we decide what that's going to be like. we can decide, and only we can decide. What I do know is that God is always there, and the door is always open, and we are always, always welcome. As hard as it is for God, God allows us that freedom, the freedom to choose, the freedom to turn one way or the other. And I have a sense that God is way more patient than most of us are, that God will wait however long it takes, but that even the worst of us can at one point or another be restored and be redeemed if we but turn, if we walk through the open door, if we cross those walls that have fallen down and be embraced by the love of God. One of the best stories I think Jesus ever told about that could well be a metaphor, a description of heaven and hell, is the story that's referred to as the prodigal son. I prefer to call it the prodigal child because we all fit in that. It's in Luke's gospel. It's in your program if you want to read the Bible passage itself. But this morning we're going to hear from Matthew an updated version of that story. So Matthew?
I have two sons, Gary and Luke. Luke is the youngest, and this is his story. By the time he was 17, we had a big farm with hundreds of hired hands and thousands of acres. We worked really hard at our home, and we had a great life. Each day, the boys and I would get up before dawn and start going about the daily chores. We worked side by side, enjoying each other, in silence mostly, bending our back to the work and enjoying each new day. Well, at least that's what I thought we were doing. It turned out Luke was silent because he hated what he was doing, and a storm was brewing in him. Anytime we needed something from town, Luke was always the first to volunteer and go get it. As he got older, those trips to town began to take longer and longer. One day, Luke got up and went to town early in the morning, and he didn't return until after dark. He came to me, and he said, "Father, I'm leaving this place. It's stifling me, holding me in. I need to be free, to find somewhere I can breathe. I'm leaving, and I'm moving to the city where I can hang out with my friends and party and be alive and not worry about the farm or getting up before dawn." "Have you thought about how you'll support yourself?" "I am owed an inheritance. Give me that now so that I can leave this place. I've worked here my whole life. Now give me what I am due." So I surprised myself, and I did what I never would have imagined. The next day, I sold half my land. I brought the money to Luke, and he took it, matter-of-factly, barely looking me in the eyes. It hurt to give up the land, but it hurt even more to see him walk out the door. "You can always come home," I told him. Life continued after that. Gary and I continued to work the farm and the fields. We still laughed some, but not as much. Gary couldn't understand why I did what I did, and there were days when I couldn't understand it either. And we would hear pieces of stories from people passing through, stories of Luke and his new life. After several years, a man who owned a farm a few towns over came to see me. "I found your boy," he said. He told me that Luke had come to his farm thin and starving and looking for work. He was working at this farm, shoveling manure and feeding the pigs. Some of the other workers had seen him eating out of the pig trough. He was so hungry. But I had told him he could come home. He knew that. A few weeks later, I saw him coming down the road. Even from far away, I knew it was him. I knew his walk. So I ran to him, yelling, "Luke is home! Grab some clothes, fire up the grill, call all the neighbors. Tonight we are having a party. Luke is finally home." But Gary didn't understand. "He left, Dad. He took everything you gave him, spent it foolishly, and came back with nothing. You never gave me anything." "My son," I said, "your brother, who was lost to us, is come home. You are also here with me. You are here. You are home. Everything I have is already yours. It always was. Now come, let's celebrate. Your brother has returned to us.
Do you see the analogy in that story? The father is representing God, and the son, Luke in this case, but the son has left home. And the father has told him that the door is always open, he can always come back. But he goes away to have a life that's partying and fun and such. But one day he turns around, and he turns toward home, and he heads back. And his dad ran to him, wrapped his arms around him, told him to get ready. They were going to have a big party. All the neighbors were invited. They were going to welcome him home. That's like heaven. We're welcomed home when we turn toward God and cross that threshold. But think about the elder brother. The elder brother is self-consumed and self-absorbed. He's pouting because the younger brother is getting all the attention, and look what he did, where he had stayed faithful. He didn't understand that he was loved all the time because he turned away from it. He wasn't accepting it anymore. I think that's the story of what God's love is all about. Well, so heaven and hell. We saw the older son experiencing a kind of hell, being in hell. The younger son turning and realizing the love of God that surrounds us all and accepting it. So what can we say? No one knows for sure what happens after we die. But I have to say that I really like something a pastor, whom I don't know, said not long ago. These words: "The human invention of hell is an insult to the integrity and love of God." Gosh, I wish I'd said that, because I think that's really right on. So how do we know? What does it mean for this life? I think we can experience hints of what heaven is like, because we have an opportunity to share love with those we care for, and to experience their love back to us. We have the opportunity every single day to live in this wonderful world. Yeah, there are problems, there are difficulties, but we have the capacity to change all that. And we get the chance to look at the beauty, to let it surround us. We just have to be. We have to be in the moment. We have to be present. We have to be taking in it all and giving all of ourselves that we possibly can. I think that's a hint that we experience in this life. I don't know what happens after we die. All I can say is that I trust God, a God of infinite love. And when it comes to the afterlife, I trust that this God is in it. And if that's the case, then all will be well.